I'm going to say good afternoon to everyone, and I'm here to present critical thinking skill number 1. And I'm Mary Walkins. I teach mathematics, and in particular today I'll be sharing how I embedded it and implemented it in college algebra course, which is a 100 level course, and it's pretty much the entry point for those going into business, accounting, of course mathematics, and also the natural sciences. Merle just passed around the note that I'll be sharing from today, and in particular, in this college algebra course, in fact, let me go back. With the critical thinking skill number 1, most taxonomies for learning will have the foundation as, for knowledge, or as the Bloom's taxonomy puts it, for knowledge and remembering. Lee University calls it learning for understanding and retention. And in particular, my rationale for using critical thinking skills in this college algebra course is under purpose, in particular purpose. You will notice that it says this course is designed to equip students with a working knowledge of the algebraic principles and methods which are basic to further study in the natural sciences, mathematics, and accounting. And the word working knowledge was the thing that kind of stood out for me, where I felt this critical thinking skill number 1 could be appropriately used here. And last year, we were told we have to embed it in our course. So on at the bottom of the page there, under objectives of the course, you'll notice that in part A, number 4, I wrote there to acquaint students with critical thinking skill number 1, learning for understanding and retention. And I'm calling it CTS number 1 from here on. And then if we turn the page, page 2, in part B, these were the places where I specifically embedded the critical thinking skill number 1 in the specific behavioral objectives. And the first one, that's number 1, to distinguish between the number systems. So I wanted students to know how to, what the different types of numbers were, the real numbers, whether they were natural, whole, integers, rationals, and so on. In number 5, it talks about solving linear equations by first applying CTS number 1. I actually wanted students to know what a linear equation before we could even go about solving the equation. And in number 6, it talks about solving quadratic equations by first applying CTS number 1. And again there I wanted them to know what a quadratic equation was before they could even go ahead solving it. In number 10, applying critical thinking skill number 1 to identify functions. I wanted students to first know what a function is, how they can relate one quantity to another, and then of course later on they had to somehow apply this knowledge there. And the last one, the 5th portion where I embedded it specifically, was in number 14, to solve systems of equations by first applying CTS number 1. So I wanted them to know what a system of equations was, where you have 2 or more equations and 2 or more unknowns, and then applying the critical thinking skill number 1 there. At the bottom of the page, with the the 4 parts here for the critical thinking skill number 1, learning for understanding and retention. The first part is to summarize or restate in their own words. Now I know with mathematics there isn't much wiggle room really for in terms of defining certain terms. However, in number 2, I asked them to elaborate on certain areas pertaining to this, and in a moment you will see on page 3 how I did that. And in number 3, we have to give the examples to support or clarify, and it was very interesting to see students' examples. And number 4, to relate the issue to real life situations. Now, with mathematics, students always want to know, well, where are we going to use this idea and how is it going to be applied. But I was really pleasantly surprised to see how students were able to come up with ideas and ways in which one could relate those concepts that were discussed in class to real life situations. Another thing, as for the reason why I chose this critical thinking skill number one, the students would have had to do a little writing, and for the last few years they've been talking about writing across the curriculum, and even in mathematics you can write. And if you turn the page to page 3, this is an example of my pre-quiz number 4 that I gave, and this was concerning the idea of systems of equations. So in number 1, they write in their own words, what they understood by a system of equations. So they would probably say something to the effect that, you can have 2 or more equations in 2 or more unknowns. And then number 2, I asked them to elaborate on what it means to solve it. So here they would have had to, say something to the effect where they have to find values that would make both equations true at the same time or simultaneously. And then number 3, where they will have to give an example. Number 4, where they will discuss how systems of equations can be used in real life. And some of them said, you could do it in situations where you're investing money into 2 accounts, and one has to figure out the amount that you will have to have in the one with least risk or something of that sort. But it was really interesting to see what they wrote there. Now, I must say that these pre-quizzes were actually given as a take-home exercise, and this was done before I even discussed the subject in class. And I told them that they could read a book and do the quiz if they wanted, or just from their foreknowledge they can write responses to the questions. And of course, like the first pre-quiz, they really did very well, and in a moment you'll see on page 4, they really did well. I don't know if that was because it's the beginning of the semester, they probably had a lot of time, maybe, I don't know, to really do it well. But anyway, in that first pre-quiz they did pretty well. Later on they didn't do so well in the pre-quiz. And then the post-quiz is actually pretty much the exact questions I asked, because I really wanted to make sure they understood those concepts so that we can apply them in solving problems and so on. On page 4, here is where I did the assessment, and of course Dr. Mary Ruth this morning gave you in your packets the page where after you've taught or piloted the course, piloted the skill in your course, you will have to do a similar thing like this. And the first thing we have to give is the rationale why we're integrating that skill in the course. And to me it was natural because of the purpose that was stipulated in the syllabus, where students had to have that working knowledge. So that was my rationale for doing that. Then the activity, as I mentioned before, I administered those pre-quizzes and post-quizzes on 5 ideas. So it was a total of 10, but it's really the same, a repetition of those 5 main ideas. And then the pre-test, as I said before, the pre-quiz was actually a take-home quiz. And if you look at the measure and the results, here, in pre-quiz number 1, 79.1, the average was 79.1%. And again, that was actually the highest pre-quiz average. And I just think it was the beginning of class. Students really read. Maybe later on they didn't read before coming into class, and that was okay to a certain degree. Number 2, in pre-quiz 2, the average was 40.9%, pre-quiz 3, 47%, pre-quiz 4, 63.1%, and in number 5, 64.47%. So you notice in the middle there, it was below 50%, and then increased a little over 60%. But now in the post-test, my hope anyway was that with the post-test that they would do hopefully much better, and thankfully they did. And the post quizzes were done after we had already discussed the material in class, and the post-quiz averages were significantly better. In number 1, 94.8% was the average, 2, 81%, 3, 72.13%, 4, 91.3%, and number 5, 91.3%. After I had done all of this, it came to me, and this summer actually I was thinking about it, but didn't have enough information. But I did go back in my grade book to see if there were any students who actually did better on the pre-test than the post-test. What do you think happened? Do you think there were several students who did better on the pre-test? Not many, right? You're right. In number 1, there wasn't anybody. In number 2, there was 1, but I realized it was due to absence, thankfully. But 3 and 4, there were 3 in number 3 persons who did better on pre-quiz 3, and in 4, 2 did better on pre-quiz 4. And I was looking, well, one of them I remember I had asked her, how come, so actually she said, there were careless mistakes. And I'm hoping that this coming fall, when I do the pre-quizzes and post-quizzes, that, I will ask them immediately, find them, pull them aside from class or so and ask them what happened here, how come you did better on the pre-quiz than the post-quiz kind of thing. But on number 5, there were 2 who did better on the pre-quiz, and one of them was due to absence, and the other, I guess, maybe careless mistakes, I'm not sure. So this is what I have done.